Good morning and welcome to PWR Today, Wednesday morning. It's May 3rd, or as I've been saying for the last 3 days, level 6 of Jumanji. This world is getting crazy. It's the man they call Meathead, joining you every morning, Monday through Friday. It's Wednesday. It's time to, if you haven't to already, head on over to Facebook, head on over to YouTube, head on over to Apple Podcasts. Make sure you go into Fight TV. Go find our shows. Go find our podcasts. You know, we're doing live shows almost every day of the week. I think the only day we're not doing is Saturdays. Otherwise, we got something coming at you all the time. Make sure you're liking. Make sure you're subscribing. Make sure you're checking out the man they call Meathead and everyone from the Pro Wrestling Report. Damian Nelson and Dave Hero. Tomorrow night, we'll be having another live primetime with Hurricane Helms. Make sure you're tuning in for that. If you subscribe, you'll be getting the notifications. There's times they've done bonus episodes and just out of nowhere, hey, let's do another edition of it. So make sure you're subscribing and liking, and you'll get notifications of when we're on. Speaking of while we're on, I'm bringing back the man they call Matthew Thomas. Good morning, Matthew.
Hey, good morning. You know, if we need something to do on Saturday mornings, I'm sure there's some rock and wrestling or some type of fun cartoon we can cover.
Yeah, probably. Again, I hate to show my age on these kind of things, but, rock and wrestling would be my wheelhouse. I know you know of rock and wrestling. You probably watched it in, historical rerun version, if you will, but you might be more along the lines of a Looney Tunes kind of guy, right? Or, what was the Animaniacs?
Actually, I'm more along the lines of a Super Mario Brothers show featuring one Lou Albano, which we could actually work that in to our Saturday morning coverage because it's wrestling related.
Gotcha. No, Saturday mornings for me, man, growing up in the Milwaukee, which is Algonquin for the good land. Growing up for me on Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. is normally either Superstars or, Challenge or one of those. And then on Sundays at 11 a.m., right before Packers played at noon because, they were a scrub team and, they played on the early game every Sunday. Right before that was AWA, Superstars of Wrestling. So that was my weekend right there. Big bowl of cereal. Sundays maybe ham and rolls, after church, watch a little wrestling in Grandma's house, and that's how it went.
WWF and AWA, you must have had one of those fancy antennas.
No. AWA was huge in the Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa area. That's AWA country, sir.
Yes, sir. Back in the old territory days, huh?
That's right. One of my favorites, obviously, the Crusher from South Milwaukee. Hey, how about those dollies, huh? You also had the Claw, you had Vern Gagne, you had Greg Gagne, and that's where guys like, historically we all know this now, but that's where guys like Hogan and Flair and the Iron Sheik, Sheiky Baby, the Jumpin' Jim Bronzell and B. Brian Blair, the Killer Bees, and, that's where DDP came from. That's where all those guys worked those areas. That's where Big Scott Hall came from before he showed up in WWF. So, Kurt Hennig and all the rest of them, Nick Bockwinkel, Larry the Axe Hennig. I mean, just to name a few of guys that ran through the AWA.
How fun must it have been in early mid 80s to have a big satellite dish and be able to watch all the territory shows?
It must have been fun. Again, not me. We did have cable at that time. Actually, I had HBO before we had cable. Before it came to Milwaukee, we had the HBO dish on our house. So we got the little plastic magazine that told you what was going to be on. I watched a lot of Porky's and a lot of Poltergeist.
There you go. I'm noticing a pattern of movies starting with P.
Yep. And there was Revenge of the Nerds, but, there was a P in there somewhere. Well, there was, it was rated R, so of course there was some. But I digress. What we're going to talk about today is WWE Network released a clip called Sting the Lost Tape. Matthew, have you seen it?
Yes, I have. I watched it last night, as a matter of fact.
Okay. What'd you think?
Didn't know quite what to expect. What I left it really wondering was, what this was supposed to be used for. And I think I figured it out. If you recall, back around that time period when WCW were releasing their pay-per-views on VHS, generally they would include a little bit of a bonus feature. I imagine this was filmed for something like that, but it was very interesting watching this and really trying to ascertain what they were, going after. I mean, it almost seemed like 96 would have been an election year. So maybe this was like a little puff piece for, a campaign tape for Sting or something like that.
Maybe. And, Matthew, off here, we talked about it a little bit. I felt like we were close, but you pointed out to me so, eloquently that I was off by a year. We, for those that don't know this, and for those that do following the PWR, Matthew and I did a Nitro. What were we calling it? It was a Nitro recap. We pretended like it was live that night. So if we watched Nitro, we'd throw in tidbits from that time in history. The opening song was a mix of California Love. Dun, 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 dun. We did that to make it seem like it was 1996, and we kind of followed along, starting with the day that Scott Hall showed up on the Monday Nitro. I felt like I was watching wrestling right before that WCW NWO stuff started.
Yeah, and really, one thing that grabbed me while I was watching this was what an interesting time in the business, because this is 95. So we're a year removed from Hall jumping ship and showing up on Nitro. We're a year removed from Hollywood Hogan. We're a year removed from the dawn of Austin 316 and the 96 King of the Ring, which I believe you gave away your tickets to somebody on the street, or lost them, or left them in a bathroom stall or something. If I remember,
I didn't even get anything for it. I didn't even get a quick reach. Nothing. I got nothing for it.
Yep, and you at one point you had like 20 pairs in your possession,
like
20
that.
pairs, 20 pairs King of the Ring 96 tickets, huh?
Well, it wasn't even at the big arena. So for those that don't know, when they talk about the Mecca Arena, they talk about the Milwaukee Auditorium, whatever they're calling it, Wisconsin Center now, UW Panther Arena. When they talk about that building, that's not the number one building in Milwaukee. Right now, you might get the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee Panthers playing at it. You might get Milwaukee Wave playing at it. But the big building is actually now the Fiserv building. That's where the Bucks play. That's where the Milwaukee Admirals play. So that's the big building. That's where Marquette plays. I might be wrong on the Admirals. The Admirals actually might be playing at the Panther Arena as well. But no, the big state-of-the-art building where all the big concerts and all the big events go. When WWE comes, they're at the Fiserv. So this building that they had it at wasn't even at the big building because they couldn't fill the big building. And then they're giving, a man they call Meathead 20 or 10 pairs or whatever tickets to give away to paper the building.
Well, they picked the right man for the job, because it sounds like you gave them away all right.
No, I gave it away. I gave it away now. That's for sure.
Yeah, so, basically going back to what I was saying, you're a year removed from that. So you're in this interesting 95 WCW period where Hogan's been with the company for around a year. You've got Macho Man there. But really just a period in the business that you would not really see again. Things changed so significantly in 96. The wrestling genre just changed gears dramatically. You were starting to get heels, rise to popularity. You were starting to get heels cheered more consistently. You were starting to blur those lines between, what was real, what wasn't. Scott Hall jumping ship as Scott Hall. You were starting to get to that period where more of the business was starting to be exposed. You're still a couple of years away from Montreal, but 95 was really one of the last full years where you, in a large sense, had your good old-fashioned kayfabe wrestling that was, in full effect. And one of the last years, honestly, that I think a just full-fledged white meat baby face like a 1995 version of Sting could get the reception that 1995 Sting got, like we saw at Slamboree 95. So this was really, it was a quick lost tape. I think it ran 27 minutes in its entirety.
27, something like that.
Yeah. And 12 of that was the match against Big Bubba at Slamboree 95. But really what grabbed me more than anything was this was such a significant encapsulation in time, because the business was getting ready to change significantly a year later. And it's never gone back to this.
No, this was the end of the, your mom and dad's wrestling. This was the end of it. As, you look at guys that were on there, like this is right where it was starting to, because WCW was starting to throw money out to get these talents. Macho Man was in WCW. You had Gene Okerlund had just come over. Bobby Heenan was doing commentary on that match. I mean, this is where Terry Taylor had just jumped over too. So this is where you're back and forth, and guys are, starting to get the money, starting to see the money. I mentioned this to you earlier yesterday. We were talking about what we were going to talk about, and I said, it's kind of tough. WCW didn't really treat Sting. WCW is Sting to WCW is like the Undertaker to the WWE. Once he was there, he kind of stayed there, and he was the company guy. And we'll get to Undertaker in a second, but Sting, they didn't really treat him like a star. And he even said during this little lost tape, I don't feel like a superstar. I feel like just the Stinger, man, that goes out there and loves being out there with the fans, and it just, love hollering and woo, and then, all that other stuff. I mean, this is a guy that, used to have to make. I've heard these interviews on some of the other Sting stories that they've done on the WWE Network, where he said, he did these multi-promotional meet and greets. And he's like, wow, this is how you guys are treated over here? Because I'm sitting in the back of the barn smoking a cigarette waiting to come out or something like that. So Sting really never led that superstar lifestyle that maybe the WWF talent had.
Yeah. And I was watching this and just kind of thinking about Sting's career path and wondering what our discussion would be some 25 years removed from Sting had we never had Crow Sting. And how pivotal of a fork in the road that was for him. And I think that largely is what has helped contribute to the longevity of Sting, because you've got 95 Sting here going up in a, pretty much mid-card match against Big Bubba, which interestingly enough was a lights out match, which traditionally would be the last match of the night after the official main event, because lights go out and this is not an official part of the card. So right. It's unsanctioned and anything, but it sounds like they sandwiched it right in the middle of the card, because in this match they were teasing Hogan and Macho Man a little bit later. So losing a little bit of the literalness that you would have an actual lights out match. But nonetheless, and just kind of looking back at his career path, I mean, you had the Sting Flair feud and you had the initial Sting title run, but you get a period here, especially in the mid 90s, where you've got the big money spent on Hogan and Macho Man, and everything is being pushed towards these former WWF talents. This would have been, I guess Piper Kate would have come in 96. So you're still a little ways away from that, but just seeing, how everybody else is treated, these WWF talents, but just so many things you can kind of look at with Sting and WCW and wonder what if. Again, I think the creation of the Crow Sting really led to a Sting resurgence in that time period, 96, 97. But, another thing is it was initially talked about Sting being that third man when they were a little bit tentative on pulling the trigger on Hogan and having Hogan join the NWO. So Sting could have been the third man in the NWO, which I think would have worked well. I think it would have gotten us a similar Sting to what we got with Crow Sting. Maybe not in the full makeup and dark hair and whatnot, but you would have had a darker Sting. And looking at this tape from 95, I think something like that was needed, whether it was NWO Sting or whether it was Crow Sting that we eventually got. I just think going into that time period where you've got people like Austin getting hot, you've got the NWO exploding, I don't think you could have run just the same old Sting through the end of the decade and expected people not to tire of that gimmick to a certain extent.
Yeah, and it's not just tiring of the gimmick. I mean, the world had changed. Think about it this way, and I'm going to delve off somewhere else, but come back and make a point to it. Music. All these bands are super hot, right? These hair bands, the late 80s and 90s, whatever, and they go into, maybe talk about their next album, whatever, and then their record company has all these different posters. That's when, like, Seattle exploded. That kind of stuff happens. So, I mean, if you kept out with that same Sting, California Sting or, Surfer Sting or whatever you wanted to call it, that's going to end up tiring out, and then you're going to see all these different characters, and that, Sting might have seen the writing on the wall, maybe somebody in creative. I know it was Scott Hall that really, pitched the Crow Sting, if you will. You see the kind of writing on the wall, and, you either take your shot and take your opportunity when it's there, or you kind of flounder not taking it.
Yeah, and one interesting piece here, they're asking him on the hotline about his contract, and I
Yeah.
don't have any of the information in front of me, and I'm sure it's out there somewhere, and I'm sure I've heard it somewhere. But what interests me too is, had you had a Sting move to WWF at some point, I think probably late 93, early 94, after you had lost Hogan, after Hogan had gone away, that might have been the prime time for Sting to go, because they still needed a baby face top of the card guy. And we would eventually get Brett's run, and we would eventually get Shawn's run. But I think that might, and again, I don't know if anything would have lined up contract wise, but I think that late 93, early 94 time might have been the time for Sting to jump, if there was a time where you still could have segued into this ultra baby face at the top of the card.
Speaking of that too, I mean, you had mentioned too, what would have happened? What would it have looked like if we would have got Sting Undertaker at that point? Now we did, end up talking about Sting Undertaker. I mean, Sting Undertaker, like today, for example, just wouldn't work for me. But I mean, what if we would have got mid '90s, late '90s Sting Undertaker?
Man, I don't know that would have. You would have had California Sting at that time, and I don't know that the appeal would have been there. The other option of a Sting jump would be, say late 90s, because at that point you've established the Crow Sting character, and you're kind of getting into the Ministry of Darkness Undertaker at that point, which may very well have been the sweet spot for that to happen, because you've had a couple of years for Sting to build up
Where
that character.
to, Stephanie?
Mm-hmm. I think that might have been your other best shot there. And one thing we're talking about Sting's tenure in WCW, I was thinking as I was watching this and preparing for tonight's show, Sting, the company guy, he's got that tenure in WCW, but man, that guy was a TNA guy for quite a while too.
He sure was.
He stuck around there. He stuck around there for quite some time.
His choice was to not go to WWE, and that's why he wasn't. I mean, he was part of the Main Event Mafia. I mean, he had that forgettable match with Jeff Hardy where he apologized to the fans afterwards for Jeff's appearance.
And we also got Sting Hogan at that Bound for Glory that year, which I actually had the pleasure of watching in a theater. That was the string of a couple of years where TNA was actually showing Bound for Glory. They may have shown a Lockdown as well too in select theaters, and I was one of the select individuals that got to sit in one of those select theaters.
Did you take a select box of popcorn, or did you get a select hot dog, or did you cut a hole in the bottom of the popcorn? How did that select action work?
Only for the previews, but that was you know what, I didn't take advantage of it, but a friend of mine actually sent in his movie stub to the offices of TNA in Nashville and received a free Bound for Glory t-shirt like 7 or 8 months later after he mailed it off. So he still got a souvenir from that Bound for Glory to this day.
Fair enough. The one question I've always had now since we watched the Sting the Lost Tape, do you think he ever got the money from that gin game?
I do not know, but the answer that I want to find out more so than that is, did he ever go back and clean his makeup out of the sink? Did you just see him just walk away from the sink where he still
started to rinse it? He started to rinse it.
Well, I mean, the water was running and some was coming out, but you had a couple of little spots in there that they didn't necessarily, it wasn't going to go away with just a rinse. It needed a rub too. And I never saw Sting administer the rub.
Maybe, you never know. They got how many miles of tape for the Nasty Boys? So the coach doesn't have to tape up Stinger.
Exactly.
I enjoyed this. I really did. It was a nice little dip into it. The VCR gimmicks that they did for the video were kind of corny. Other than that, I did enjoy it. It was fun to watch. It was, a good 15 minutes of stuff that they had recorded. It's something to talk about. Other than that, there really wasn't much going on. So, a little diversion from everything that's going on today. Folks, again. Go ahead.
One thing I want to add before we leave, one thing that really interested me was, notice the careful attention that Macho Man and Buff Bagwell, and I think there was Brian Pillman.
What a young Brian Pillman, too.
notice the careful attention the attention that they pay to being in character. It wasn't a shoot. It wasn't a full shoot. They were, their guard was dropped a little bit, but it was so interesting. And so 1995, before the business was being fully given away in these books and these documentaries, to where, okay, we want to make it seem behind the scenes, but we still want you to keep, stay in character to a certain extent. So with Macho Man, you have Macho Man is still Macho Man, but he's not dialed quite up to 11.
He was dialed up. Yeah, he was kind of calm. He's like, I'll tell you what, this is one of the greatest athletes. Never going to pay him. Hey, I'll get you that money, brother.
Yeah, so that was probably my biggest takeaway from it. What I enjoyed the most was watching them try to produce this behind the scenes video that wasn't actually behind the scenes.
Fair enough. All right. Facebook, Fight TV, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. If you haven't yet liked and subscribed to us, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and do that. Make sure you're aware of when all the new shows come up. And this has been PWR Today for Wednesday, June 3rd, 2020. For Matthew Thomas, I'm the man they call Meathead. Thanks for stopping by. So long, everyone.